Welcome to Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Amin Momanian, where we deep dive into economics and politics.
Okay.
And today,
Sounds good.
we're going to be looking at the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Kind of a fascinating puzzle. You know, a lot of people, especially intellectuals, revolutionaries, saw it as like a beacon of hope,
Right.
for the oppressed.
Yeah.
But then when you look closer,
Yeah.
you see a system that was just riddled with brutality and suppression.
Yeah.
So how could something be so attractive on the surface, but so horrifying underneath?
Well, I think what's really captivating is that this idealized image drew support globally.
Right.
People envisioned this utopia, a haven for the working class.
Right.
But then you had, you uncover the reality: brutal suppression, human rights violations, on an unprecedented scale.
Yeah.
Forced labor camps. It's jarring.
It's like there were two Soviet Unions.
Yeah.
Like the shining ideal.
Yeah.
And then the terrifying reality. And then we can't forget about things like the Red Terror.
Right.
Like a period of state-sanctioned violence and persecution that paints a very different picture.
Yeah, I mean, the story of André Marty, the French sailor, I think perfectly illustrates this duality.
Okay.
He was initially celebrated, right, as this hero for his pro-Soviet actions.
Yeah.
He even prevented French aid from reaching anti-communist forces in Russia, so he became this symbol of international solidarity.
So he was like a celebrity for the cause, basically.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But then, during the Spanish Civil War, Marty becomes known as the Butcher of Albacete for his brutal treatment of anyone deemed an enemy of the revolution.
Wow. So how did this system, which was supposedly built on equality and liberation, become so oppressive?
Right.
I mean, some argue that the seeds of this brutality were present in the very philosophy that inspired the Soviet Union,
Right.
the ideas of Karl Marx.
It's a controversial claim, but there's a case to be made that certain aspects of Marxist philosophy may have inadvertently laid the groundwork for the Soviet Union's darker side.
Okay.
For example, his emphasis on dissolving individual distinctions in favor of a collective whole.
Right.
That could be interpreted as downplaying individual rights and freedoms.
So essentially, like, individual needs and desires become secondary to the needs of the collective.
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds like it could be used to justify some pretty harsh action.
Exactly. And this ties into Marx's view of humanity as entirely social.
Okay.
Right? By minimizing individual aspects of human nature. His philosophy might unintentionally devalue individual experiences and suffering.
Okay.
So if someone struggles or disagrees, it's because they haven't fully embraced the collective, not because they have legitimate concerns.
That's a very specific way of viewing the world. It doesn't seem to leave much room for dissenting opinions.
Precisely. And this leads us to Marx's concept of freedom.
Okay.
He defines it as the full development of one's potential, but only within the framework of the collective.
Okay.
Right? So individual choice and unorthodox views just don't factor into the equation.
So freedom, in this context, isn't really about individual liberty then.
Right.
It's about conforming to a predetermined path set by the collective.
Yes, and that narrow definition could be used to justify forcing people into roles they might not want.
Right.
Right? If individual happiness isn't prioritized,
Right.
what's to stop a system from exploiting its people for some greater good?
That's a pretty bleak thought.
Yeah.
Especially unsettling when you consider the Soviet Union's use of forced labor camps.
This raises an important question.
Yeah.
If individual well-being is considered secondary, what safeguards are there against a system becoming tyrannical in the pursuit of its goals?
That's a question worth pondering. But even if we accept that some of Marx's ideas could be twisted to justify oppression, wasn't the Soviet Union supposed to be about abolishing the division of labor?
Right.
Everyone working together, no hierarchy, everyone equal?
That was the ideal, yes. But the reality on the ground was much different.
Right.
Ironically, some of the Soviet Union's achievements, especially in science and technology, actually contradicted this core Marxist principle.
Okay, how so? I'm having trouble seeing the connection.
Think about what it took to send the first human to space.
Right?
You need incredibly specialized knowledge, expertise,
Yeah.
and a clear chain of command.
Right.
You can't have everyone pitching in equally on something as complex as rocket science.
So you're saying that even a system supposedly built on abolishing the division of labor still needed specialized experts and hierarchies to function.
Precisely. The Soviet Union needed scientists, engineers, mathematicians,
Yeah.
individuals with very specific skills.
Right.
This created a class of technical experts who enjoyed a privileged position, which goes against the idea of a truly classless society.
So even from the start, there were, like, internal contradictions within the Soviet system.
Exactly.
Like, the reality didn't match the utopian ideals.
Exactly. And this tension between theory and practice played a significant role in the Soviet Union's trajectory. And it wasn't just about specialized labor. Even Lenin, the architect of the Soviet state,
Right.
he admitted to feeling lost when faced with the realities of governing.
Yeah.
Marx's writings, while full of revolutionary rhetoric,
Right.
offered little practical guidance
Yeah.
for managing a real-world society.
It's like having a grand blueprint for a building, but no instructions on how to actually construct it.
A perfect analogy, and that's where Marx's critique of the Gotha program comes in.
Okay.
Unlike his other works, which focused on criticizing capitalism,
Right.
the critique offered concrete suggestions for structuring a socialist economy and a state. Like it's almost like a blueprint.
Right.
And Lenin and the Bolsheviks drew heavily from it.
So what were some of the key ideas in this critique that shaped Soviet policy?
One of the most significant was the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Okay.
Marx argued that before reaching full communism,
Right.
a transitional phase of authoritarian rule was necessary.
So instead of the state withering away, as Marx predicted,
Right.
it became even more powerful.
Unfortunately, yes. This idea provided justification for suppressing dissent
Right.
and concentrating power in
Yeah.
the hands of the Communist Party. And this was further reinforced by Marx's call for a strong, centralized state,
Okay.
controlling all means of production.
That doesn't sound very egalitarian. And what about his stance on forced labor?
Sadly, in the critique, Marx advocated for a labor army, essentially laying the groundwork for the Gulag system.
So the supposed champion of the working class advocated for a system that would ultimately lead to the enslavement of millions.
Yeah.
It's a tragic irony.
It is, and it highlights the danger of utopian thinking detached from the realities of human nature
Right.
and the complexities of governing. Countries like China and Cambodia attempted even more extreme versions of Marxist ideals with disastrous consequences.
Yeah, their attempts to achieve, like, a pure form of communism led to unimaginable suffering and death.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of what can happen when ideology is taken to extremes. But how did the Soviets, for so long, maintain this facade of a worker's paradise while committing such atrocities?
They were incredibly effective at controlling information and propaganda.
Right.
They presented themselves as a beacon of hope against fascism and imperialism, appealing to those who longed for a more just world.
So they were like marketing geniuses, in a way.
Indeed, and many people simply couldn't fathom the extent of the brutality.
Right.
They clung to the utopian ideal, refusing to believe their socialist paradise could be built on such a foundation of suffering. But eventually, the truth began to emerge.
Like cracks in a seemingly perfect facade.
Exactly. Dissidents spoke out, Gulag survivors shared their stories, and the West gained a better understanding of the regime's inner workings. But even then, the allure of the Soviet ideal remained strong for some.
Right.
Many continued to believe the ends justified the means,
Yeah.
that the dream of a classless society was worth any sacrifice, no matter how horrific.
It's a stark reminder of the power of belief, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if any system could truly achieve the kind of utopian, classless society that Marx envisioned.
That's the core question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is there an inherent conflict between such grand ideals and the complexities of human nature and governance?
It seems like the Soviet Union's fatal flaw was trying to force like a square peg into a round hole.
Okay.
They took a complex theory of societal evolution and tried to impose it on reality with an iron fist. It's like making a souffle with a jackhammer.
An apt analogy. But the question remains, could it have been different? Could a socialist system inspired by Marx ever truly succeed?
Yeah,
Some argue that the Soviet Union simply went about it the wrong way,
right.
that true socialism requires democratic participation, not authoritarian control.
So like a more bottom-up approach
Precisely.
rather than top-down.
They point to examples like the Scandinavian countries, which have achieved high levels of social welfare
Right.
and equality within a democratic framework.
But aren't those countries still capitalist societies, just with strong social safety nets?
They are, but they demonstrate that it's possible to achieve many goals Marx fought,
Okay,
reducing inequality, ensuring a decent standard of living,
right.
without resorting to violent revolution or totalitarian rule.
So maybe it's not about choosing between capitalism and socialism, but finding a balance.
Yeah,
A system that harnesses the benefits of both
right.
while mitigating their downsides.
It's a compelling idea, perhaps a more nuanced approach that acknowledges both the complexities of human nature
Yeah.
and the need for individual freedom alongside social responsibility could offer a path forward.
It's like the saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Right.
Maybe striving for a utopia is what led the Soviets astray. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I'm going to need some time to process all this.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Yeah.
And to our listeners, we leave you with this final thought. What does the Soviet experience teach us about the pursuit of utopia?
Right.
Is a perfectly just and equitable society achievable?
Right.
Or are we destined to grapple with the inherent tensions between individual freedom and collective good? Something to ponder as you go about your day.
Those Scandinavian countries you mentioned, those are interesting.
Yeah,
They seem to have found a way to blend, social welfare
right,
with individual freedom,
right.
something that the Soviet Union clearly struggled with.
Yeah, the Scandinavian model offers an interesting counterpoint to the Soviet experience.
Right.
They demonstrate that you can have robust social safety nets, you can prioritize equality, and still maintain a democratic framework that respects individual liberties.
So maybe the key takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial insight.
Yeah.
The Soviet experience highlights the dangers of rigidly adhering to ideology
Right.
and trying to force fit a particular model onto a complex society.
Right.
It's a reminder that flexibility, pragmatism,
Yeah.
and a willingness to adapt are essential for any system to thrive.
Makes you question the whole concept of utopia.
Right,
Is it even possible to create a perfectly just and equitable society?
right.
Or is that just like a pipe dream that can lead to dangerous consequences?
It's a question that has preoccupied philosophers and political thinkers for centuries.
Yeah.
The Soviet experiment, with its tragic outcomes, certainly suggests that imposing a utopia by force is not the answer.
Right.
Perhaps the real utopia lies in the continuous striving for a better world,
Okay.
a process of constant improvement and adaptation rather than a fixed endpoint.
That's a really that's a thought-provoking perspective. It suggests that the journey itself,
Yeah,
the ongoing effort to, address inequality
right.
and create a more just society is just as important as the destination.
Exactly. And that journey requires open dialogue,
Right.
critical thinking, and a willingness to learn from both our successes and our failures.
Yeah.
The Soviet experience, while undeniably tragic,
Right.
offers invaluable lessons about the complexities of social engineering,
Right.
the allure and dangers of utopian thinking,
Okay.
and the importance of safeguarding individual rights and freedoms.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. I
Yeah,
think we covered a lot of ground here,
we did.
from the, seductive appeal of the Soviet Union to the harsh realities behind the facade
Right.
and the enduring questions it raises, about the pursuit of a just and equitable society.
It's been a pleasure exploring these complex issues with you.
Yeah. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has provided you with a new perspective on the Soviet experience and its lasting relevance in today's world.
Right.
As always, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, questioning assumptions,
Yeah.
and engaging in thoughtful dialogue.